the way in which housing is perceived from being a basic right to shelter to an asset, and also some of the contradictions in terms of resistance. Next we have Helen Mercer, who is from the Drop the NHS Debt and is going to speak to us about NHS debt.
Okay, thanks very much for inviting me. I'm from an organisation called Drop NHS Debt, and I've got some little leaflets. I'll put them at the back for you to see later. We were formed from people in an organisation called Keep Our NHS Public, which has been the major campaign against privatisation of the NHS, which is proceeding apace. And it seemed to us that nobody was really focusing on the problem of the private finance initiative in the NHS. So I don't know how many of you are aware of what a private finance initiative is, but if you are all aware, then I won't spend too long on it. But essentially it's a way of bringing private finance into the building and maintenance of hospitals. Basically it can be completely unsustainable. I come from Lewisham. I was involved in the Lewisham campaign. And there, the local hospitals got into enormous debt, whereby their payments under PFI were on up to 18% of their revenue. And of course, the government threatened them with asset loss, with the closure and downgrading of the accident and emergency, of the maternity services. And once you close the A&E and once you close the maternity services, you're basically really threatening the whole hospital, because an awful lot of admissions into a hospital come from those two sectors. It can be absolutely ruinous, these PFI debts. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the PFIs themselves and what they're like. Altogether, in the UK, various government departments, various public sectors have entered into these private finance arrangements. And the idea is that instead of raising money from the government, as you used to do, on the basis of government rates of lending, which would be the gilt rate or borrowing from the Public Works Loans Board, you get together a financial consortium and you raise the money via the financial consortium. And in turn, the hospital repays debt, the interest, the capital, and they also include in their annual repayments a charge for services. So repayments of all the PFIs in Britain are 350 billion in total, and still to pay is 250 billion. For hospitals, there are 118 straight PFIs and 2 PF2s, as they're called. They've got a capital value of 11 billion. Total repayments on that 11 billion is 77 billion, and still to pay is 67 billion. So, I mean, the point is we're about a third of the way through a lot of the contracts, but 6/7 of the way through the actual repayments because of the way the PFI is actually structured. And in terms of the total NHS budget, which is 120 billion, the repayments this year were 1.7 billion, so it's about 1%. So in Lewisham, we've calculated, now the point about PFIs is that part of the unitary repayments is not straight debt. Part of the unitary repayments is actually for service contracts. So the PFI comes as one big package whereby you build a hospital and you also outsource to the owners of the PFI, what's called the special purpose vehicle. You outsource to them the maintenance and the cleaning or the portering or the catering, whatever it might be. So you're partly paying for services, but you're partly servicing the debt. Now, for Lewisham, we've calculated that of the repayments this year, 46% is really straight profiteering. And if I just break that down, I have here a little diagram, which is very, very small, but you might be able to see it, which is that if you take your special purpose vehicle by which the private finance is raised, the trust gets money from the government, which is based on the number of patients that come into the hospital, and the CCGs give money to the hospital. The hospital trust then pays a unitary payment to the special purpose vehicle, and that is broken down into various elements. It's broken down into the payment for the actual services, It's the maintenance contracts. It's broken down into interest on bonds, and that is of two sorts, a secured debt and an unsecured debt. Now, the secured debt, which is 90% of the bond, attracts an average interest rate of 8%. Had they borrowed from the government, it's reckoned it would be about half that, about 4%. In addition, there's another part of the bond is called the unsecured debt, and that usually attracts interest rates of between 10 and 16%, so massive interest repayments on that particular part. But on top of that, the people who own the actual PFI, who own the special purpose vehicle, they get profits on just having the contract themselves. So this is profit on top of any interest that's paid, on top of any maintenance or director's remuneration, on top of all that, millions of pounds. So that my local trust, £7 million was made just in straight profit on that whole process. So it's the financialisation of the debt has just allowed for a massive skimming off of the debts. If I just very quickly talk about what our view is on how you deal with all this, our view basically is that the creditors of the NHS have to take a haircut. That's basically how we view it. That there are two principles in how you deal with this, that you either you have to have some sort of settlement whereby no more public money is shifted from one public purse to another. That, you know, if there is to be a resolution of these problems, it's to be via the creditors, not via the government bailing out the creditors in the same way that they bailed out the banks. And also there's got to be an element of democratic control and oversight over the whole process. And our other point is that we have to build a movement. The strength of the haircut depends on the muscle power behind the people wielding the scissors, I guess. That would be a way of looking at it. And how do we get that muscle power? And we get that muscle power by campaigning, by mass campaigning. And so our main purpose, really, in a way, is not of our website. It's not just to provide material, not just put material there, but to allow ordinary people, ordinary campaigners, people who are not academic researchers, people who are not teachers, just people who want to save their local hospitals or whatever it might be, that allows them to quickly get the key data about the people who are profiteering from their hospital, to make that part of a public campaign, exposing the companies and exposing the level of profiteering. So the key element of our website is this toolkit to enable people quickly to get to those bits of information and generate a campaign in that way. I could say more, but I think I'm probably out of time, so I'll leave it there. Thanks.